This is a story of betrayal that turned my life upside down. I never could have imagined that the brightest holiday of the year, Christmas, would become the moment when I lost everything. My wife betrayed me, and that blow marked the beginning of a war. I fought for my children, for justice, for my right to be a father. But what happened after I decided to seek revenge? Was I able to stand up for my dignity and my future? Watch until the end to find out how I came out of this battle. I always thought my life resembled a typical Christmas card. A cozy house on the outskirts of a small town, 2 wonderful kids, a lovely wife who seemed like the perfect homemaker, and the scent of freshly baked cookies blending with the aroma of pine. Christmas had always been a special time for us. Sophie and Henry, our children, decorated the tree, laughing and arguing over where to hang the shiny ornaments. Alice baked gingerbread cookies while I put up Christmas lights around the house. It was our traditional family celebration, something I cherished more than anything. But this year, something felt off. I could sense it deep inside, though I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Alice, my wife, seemed distant. Her laughter, once so lively and genuine, sounded strained. Her touch, which used to warm my heart, had become rare and mechanical. She often said she needed some time to herself, or that she had errands in town. I tried convincing myself it was just my imagination, but something deep inside told me otherwise. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat in the living room, staring at the tree we had decorated together. Its branches sparkled, and the star on top glowed brightly. Henry had placed it there with so much enthusiasm. My thoughts drifted to Alice again. She was in her room, staying there longer than usual. A faint light from her phone reflected in the doorway. I approached and knocked softly. "Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes, just going over the shopping list," she replied without looking my way. It was a lie. I knew it. Alice always wrote her lists on paper, but this time, she was focused on her phone. I didn't want to cause a scene, especially not right before Christmas. We had too many good memories, and I didn't want to ruin them. Later that night, when she had gone to bed, I stayed in the living room, pretending to work on gifts for the kids. In reality, I was lost in thought. What had changed? What had I done wrong? Eventually, I decided to let it go. Maybe it's just a phase, I told myself. Every marriage has its rough patches. But deep down, something gnawed at me. The uncertainty was harder to bear than any truth. Outside, snow was falling. Large, fluffy flakes drifted gently to the ground, covering everything in a pristine white blanket. The kids were asleep, and the house was enveloped in peace. But that peace felt fragile, like glass on the verge of shattering. I returned to my chair by the fireplace and picked up a mug of hot cocoa. The tree lights twinkled, casting colorful reflections on the walls. But inside, I felt darkness. And this was just the beginning. Christmas morning started as it always did in our family. Laughter, hugs, and the unwrapping of presents. Sophie squealed with delight when she found the dollhouse she had been dreaming of under the tree. Henry jumped for joy as he unwrapped his construction set. Alice sat nearby watching the kids, her smile seemingly genuine. But I knew it was just a mask. "James, you could have put a little more effort into the wrapping," she joked as the kids untangled ribbons. Her words were lighthearted, but I sensed a subtle jab in them. If I'd said something similar to her, it might have ended in an argument. After breakfast, I went to the garage to fix one of Henry's toys that had accidentally broken. Among the tools and boxes, my thoughts returned to Alice's strange behavior. Her smile, though it appeared the same as before, no longer warmed me. I began recalling moments I had overlooked. Her late nights out, lengthy chats with friends that were never mentioned around me. When I returned to the house, I saw Alice putting on her coat. "I'm just popping into town for a bit," she said. "Forgot something for dinner." I was surprised. Shops closed early during the holiday, and Alice usually planned everything in advance. "Do you need help? I can go instead," I offered. No, I'll be quick," she replied, hurrying out the door. I stood at the doorstep, watching as her car disappeared around the corner. Something didn't sit right with me. Alice had always been home for Christmas. To her, it was almost sacred. And now, she'd left us for a few hours in the middle of the holiday? That evening, after the kids were asleep, I tried to talk to her. "You've seemed different lately," I said, attempting not to sound accusatory. "Me?" Alice looked at me with surprise. "What do you mean?" Her tone was so defensive that I decided not to press further. "You just seem tired," I added, trying to soften the situation. "It's just a lot, James. Christmas, the kids, the house. You have no idea how hard it all is." She stood up and went to the bedroom, leaving me alone in the living room. There was no warmth in her voice. It was the desperate tone of someone trying to avoid a conversation. The next few days passed in a similar atmosphere. Alice seemed busy, always citing some errands. I tried not to dwell on it too much, but the thought kept circling in my mind. What if she really was hiding something? One day, when Alice left the house again, I decided to check her phone. I knew it was wrong, an invasion of her privacy, but my suspicions had become unbearable. I found messages. They were signed with just an initial K. Nothing overtly incriminating, but enough to raise questions. "You were amazing today," one of them read. Others were more subdued, yet warm. My heart sank. Perhaps it was just a friend, but the tone. It didn't feel like ordinary friendship. Alice came home that evening with the same smile as always. She even made my favorite dinner. But I couldn't shake the feeling that a chasm had formed between us. And this was only the beginning of my journey to the truth. A truth more painful than anything I could have imagined. As time went on, my anxiety only grew. Alice continued to act as though nothing was wrong. She was an attentive mother, always trying to maintain an ideal atmosphere at home, especially around the kids. But her eyes no longer looked at me the way they used to. I felt it in the smallest of things. How she avoided conversations, how rarely she hugged me now, how quickly she reached for her phone when it buzzed. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I decided it was time to act. I couldn't bear the uncertainty any longer. When Alice went to shower, I picked up her phone again. This time, I knew what I was looking for, and my heart pounded as I scrolled through her contacts. Kay was there, saved simply as Colin. I opened their messages and saw exactly what I'd feared. Their conversations were deeply personal. "Can't wait for our next meeting," one of them read. Another said, "You're so special, Alice. I've never met anyone like you." Her replies were shorter, but she was clearly flirting back. A wave of anger and despair washed over me. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. Maybe it was just a joke? A misunderstanding? But deep down, I already knew the truth. She was betraying me. When Alice returned from the bathroom, I tried to compose myself. She smiled when she saw me sitting in the living room and asked, "Is something wrong?" "No, just thinking about work." I lied. She nodded, then went to the bedroom, leaving me alone. I sat in the dark, trying to figure out what to do next. The next day, I decided I needed to see it with my own eyes. I told Alice I would be working from home and noticed the slight change in her expression. She tried to hide it, but I could read her emotions now. "All right, but I need to run into town. I promised to help a friend with her party decorations," she said. I nodded, pretending to trust her completely. But as soon as she left, I grabbed my car keys and followed her. My heart raced as I drove through the streets, making sure not to lose sight of her car. She parked near a downtown restaurant. I stayed in the car, watching as she walked inside. A few minutes passed before I saw a man approach her table. Tall, well-groomed, dressed in an expensive suit. It was Colin. They embraced, and I noticed how she leaned slightly toward him, laughing. My heart broke. This could no longer be explained away as friendship or coincidence. I waited until they came out together. She held his hand. That image was forever etched in my memory. I returned home before she did, pretending to be busy with work. When she arrived, I asked how her day had been. "Everything went great. My friend really appreciated the help," she said. I nodded silently, suppressing the urge to shout. That evening, I realized that my family would never be the same again. I decided not to confront her. Not yet. I wasn't ready for a showdown, but a plan was already forming in my mind. This was a game, and I was going to play by her rules. After seeing her with Colin, the world around me began to feel unreal. My reality, our cozy home, our traditions, our dinners, was now just a shell filled with lies. But I forced myself to hold on. I decided to wait, to learn more, to understand how deep her deceit went. Alice acted as if nothing had happened. She was an attentive mother, helping Sophie with her homework, playing board games with Henry, and smiling at me across the dinner table. Her performance as the perfect wife was so flawless that no outsider would suspect what was going on. But I saw more. I noticed how she checked her phone just a bit too often, how her eyes momentarily lost their light when she thought I wasn't looking. I began watching her more closely. Her errands in town became frequent, and she always had an excuse for them. At the same time, I developed a new ritual. Whenever Alice left the house, I got into my car and followed her. I observed her from a distance, studying her every move. She met Colin at restaurants, hotels, or simply strolled through parks with him. Her behavior was so carefree it seemed as though she didn't even consider that I might suspect anything. One day, I decided to take things further. When Alice left her phone at home, I took screenshots of her conversations with Colin. Their words were so explicit that I felt physical pain reading them. They wrote about love, plans to meet, and how much they enjoyed being together. What struck me most was how easily she could betray everything we had built over the years. But the worst part wasn't that she was having an affair. She was leading a double life. In her messages to Colin, I saw more than just infatuation. It was the kind of passion I hadn't seen in her eyes when she looked at me in a long time. At the same time, I tried not to reveal my suspicions. I maintained our usual routine, helping the kids with homework, going to work, and having dinner with the family. But inside, my plan was taking shape. I didn't want to act impulsively. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling: betrayal, humiliation, and bitterness. One day, when she returned home from another meeting with a friend, I said, "How about we take a family trip to the mountains this weekend? Play in the snow, spend time together. It might help us relax a little." Alice looked slightly caught off guard, but quickly composed herself. "That's a nice idea," she replied, "but I don't think I can. I have so much to finish before the end of the year." Her refusal was expected, yet so telling. Once, she would never have passed up a chance to spend time with the family. Now, I was just part of her facade, part of what kept her life balanced. The kids started noticing that something was wrong. One day, Sophie asked me why Mom was away from home so often. I didn't know what to say, so I lied. "She's just very busy, sweetheart." That lie was hard for me, but I knew the time hadn't come yet. I held all the cards, but I was waiting for the moment when I could play them in a way she'd never forget. The question tormented me: why? What had I done wrong? I tried to recall our years together, analyzing every moment, every argument, every detail. But it only deepened my wound. Christmas passed, and the festive spirit vanished with it. Our house no longer felt like a home. It had become a prison, where I played the role of an oblivious husband, waiting for my chance. I knew that chance would come, and when it did, she would regret everything. My plan began to form gradually, like a puzzle where every piece found its place. I was no longer the man I once was, trusting and willing to forgive any slight. Now, I was cold and calculating, like a hunter waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Alice seemed oblivious to the changes in me. Perhaps she was too engrossed in her new life with Colin. I had studied her schedule down to the smallest detail. I knew when she left the house, where she went, and whom she met. My observations continued for weeks. Each time she returned, I acted as if nothing was wrong, but inside, my rage boiled. One day, while she was in the shower, I accessed her laptop. The password was so simple I almost laughed. Our wedding date, now a cruel irony. Opening her email, I found correspondence with Colin. They were planning a weekend getaway to the mountains, the same place I had suggested we go as a family. The details included dates, the cottage address, and even a romantic dinner reservation. My heart clenched in pain, but I remained composed. I made copies of all her emails and saved photos of her and Colin that she had naively left in a hidden folder. This was only the beginning. I decided to proceed cautiously, methodically, to destroy her world as she had destroyed mine, but to do it so she felt every moment of her downfall. I started with the children. First, I spent even more time with them. We played together, went to the park, and read longer bedtime stories. I wanted them to feel an even stronger bond with me. Then I began talking to them about the importance of honesty, the value of love, and respecting family. Sophie listened intently, while Henry nodded, though he didn't fully understand yet. Alice may have sensed the changes but dismissed them as my usual parenting style. She even said, "James, you're such a wonderful father. The kids adore you." Her words now rang hollow. They meant nothing to me because I knew who she truly was. Next, I started preparing for my main move. I opened a separate bank account and began transferring part of our savings there, carefully so she wouldn't notice. Then, I hired one of the best lawyers in town and explained the situation. He advised me to gather more evidence if I wanted full custody of the children. To collect this evidence, I installed cameras around the house. They were small and discreet, hidden in lamps and on shelves. At first, I hesitated, feeling it was an invasion of her privacy. But then I realized she had left me no choice. Within weeks, I had everything I needed. Videos of her talking to Colin on the phone, confessions in her emails, even her delighted laughter as she said, "James has no idea. It's so easy." Those words were the final straw. They shattered me but also gave me the strength to finish what I had started. Now, I knew her trip with Colin would be the key moment. I would ensure she could never trust her own confidence again. But this would only be the beginning. I didn't rush. I waited for the day of her trip. I waited to strike the blow from which she would never recover. Every day leading up to her departure was a test for me. On the surface, I forced myself to act as though nothing had happened. But inside, every glance, every word, every touch from her filled me with disgust. In my mind, I played out my plan over and over, ensuring I hadn't overlooked a single detail or left any room for her excuses. Alice was staying out later and later, citing work meetings or girls' nights out. She had grown so confident in her lies that she stopped bothering to hide certain things. One day, I found a new dress in her bag. Expensive, no doubt purchased specifically for Colin. It only strengthened my resolve. The key moment was knowing her plans. She was supposed to leave on Friday morning, leaving the kids with me. "I'll be back on Sunday," she said casually over breakfast. I merely nodded. "Do you need help with anything to get ready?" I asked, feigning interest. "No, everything's all set," she replied with a smile. Her eyes sparkled with a joy I hadn't seen when she looked at me in years. During those days, I played the role of the perfect father and husband. The kids and I decorated the house for the holidays, cooked meals together, and even went to pick out a Christmas tree. Sophie kept asking, "Will Mom join us? She's really busy, but she promised to catch up." I lied, suppressing the pain those words caused me. On Friday morning, as she walked out the door with her suitcase, I watched her car disappear down the street. My turn had come. I got into my car and followed her, keeping a safe distance. She had no idea I was tailing her. She arrived at a mountain cottage, cozy and upscale, with large windows showcasing a fireplace and festive decorations. I watched as Colin approached her. They hugged and laughed like a pair of smitten teenagers. The sight made me grip the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. But this was only the beginning. I parked my car a few streets away from the cottage and returned home to initiate the second phase of my plan. The first step was contacting my lawyer. I sent him all the evidence I had gathered, videos, screenshots, photos. He immediately recognized how strong my case was. "This is airtight, James. You'll get custody of the kids, and the court will be a rude awakening for her," he said. Next, I gathered the children. "There's a slight change in plans," I told them. "We're going to spend a few days at Grandma's. You love her, don't you?" "Yes," Henry exclaimed, Sophie's face lit up as well. I made sure their move would be smooth and painless. They didn't yet understand that this wasn't just a short trip. While Alice enjoyed her time with Colin, I transformed our house into a place she wouldn't recognize. I packed up all her belongings into boxes and left them in the garage. Then I changed the locks. The keys she had would no longer work. Everything was going according to plan. I didn't rush or let my emotions take over. I had a goal, and I was more determined than ever to achieve it. When she returned on Sunday, she wouldn't find a warm home waiting for her. Instead, she'd be greeted by the cold, unforgiving reality she had created. And that would only be the beginning of her punishment. Sunday arrived quickly, though it felt like an eternity for me. Alice had no idea her world was about to turn upside down. I woke up earlier than usual to ensure everything was in place. The locks changed, her belongings packed and stored in the garage, and the kids already at their grandmother's with the nanny. I wanted them far away, shielded from the scene that might unfold. Alice pulled into the driveway in the afternoon. From the window, I watched her step out of the car with her suitcase. Her face glowed, perhaps from the time spent with Colin, or the thought of returning to the cozy home where her family awaited her. She approached the door and inserted her key into the lock. I stood in the living room, listening as she tried several times to open the door, but to no avail. Finally, she knocked. Her voice sounded puzzled. "James, open up. What's going on?" I walked slowly to the door, took a deep breath, opened it, and looked her in the eyes. Her smile faded as she registered the expression on my face. "What's this supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion and fear. "It means your game is over, Alice," I replied, my tone steady, my control unshaken. I motioned for her to come inside, and she stepped over the threshold, still clutching her bag tightly. On the coffee table in the living room lay a stack of documents. I walked over to them and gestured for her to sit. "What is this?" she asked, though she sat down. Her voice had already lost its confidence. "These are the proofs of your betrayal," I replied. "Messages, photographs, videos. Everything needed to prove your infidelity in court and secure full custody of the children." Her face turned pale. She reached for the documents, but I placed my hand on them. "Don't rush. I've already shown these to my lawyer. These are just copies." "James, this is some kind of misunderstanding," she started, but I cut her off sharply. "There's no misunderstanding. You cheated on me. You lied to me. You betrayed our family. And now you will face the consequences." She began making excuses, saying it was a mistake, that she was confused. But every word she said sounded hollow. I no longer believed her, nor did I care to listen. "The children are with me now," I said. "They're at their grandmother's house. They won't return here as long as you're around." "But this is my home too," she shouted, finally losing her composure. "No, Alice, it's not your home anymore. Your things are in the garage. You can take them and leave." "You can't do this to me," she screamed, her voice nearing hysteria. I stood calmly, walked to the door, opened it, and looked at her. "I can, and I already have." She sat frozen for a few seconds, as if unable to comprehend what was happening. Then she abruptly stood, grabbed her bag, and stormed out. Her final glance at me was a mixture of anger, despair, and fear. I closed the door behind her and stood in the silence. The house, which for months had been a place of pain and deceit, now felt like a symbol of freedom. This was only the first part of my revenge, but it was the most crucial. Alice had lost everything she valued, and this was just the beginning of her downfall. Alice was gone, but I knew this wasn't the end. She wasn't the type to give up easily. Instead, I anticipated her next move. Her stubbornness and determination had always been part of her nature, and now they had become tools in my game. The next morning, I received the first call. Her number flashed on the screen, but I didn't answer. Shortly after, a message came through. "James, you can't do this to me. We need to talk. The children can't be without their mother. Please, give me a chance to explain everything." I read the message and closed it. Now she was pleading, but I wasn't playing by her rules anymore. The power was in my hands. A few days later, my lawyer informed me that Alice had tried to contact him. She had yelled about how it was her house too, how I had no right to lock her out. The lawyer calmly explained that, legally, I had every right to change the locks since I was the primary owner of the property. She had no choice but to collect her boxes from the garage. Alice came late that evening. I watched her from the window, hidden in the shadows. Nervously, she opened the trunk of her car and began loading the boxes one by one. The sight brought me a strange sense of satisfaction. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was in control of my life. The next blow I dealt was through the children. I arranged sessions with a child psychologist who spent time with Sophie and Henry. The psychologist confirmed that they were significantly happier living with me and that the previous tension in the household had caused them stress. This became another strong argument for court. Then I took the matter public. I reached out to her friends and her parents, calmly presenting the truth, complete with evidence. At first, they were shocked. Some even tried to defend her, saying, "Everyone makes mistakes." But when they saw the photos, messages, and videos, they fell silent. Alice began losing her support system. Friends who had once been her closest allies started ignoring her calls. Her parents, deeply disappointed upon learning the truth, didn't offer her help. She was left alone, without a home, without her family, without her reputation. To survive, she moved to a cheap apartment on the outskirts of the city. I knew it was beneath her usual standards, another blow to her pride. Meanwhile, I continued building our new life with the kids. We relocated to a larger house closer to their school, in a neighborhood Sophie liked. I set up their rooms and let them choose the decor, ensuring they felt at home. Alice made several attempts to contact the children. She wrote letters, but I reviewed them before allowing them to read anything. Most of the letters were attempts to elicit their pity, expressing how much she missed them and wished to fix everything. I didn't let her manipulate their emotions. After a few months, the court ruled in my favor. I was granted full custody of the children. Alice was allowed to see them only once a month under supervision and only after proving she could provide a stable environment. That was the final blow. Alice broke. She was no longer the confident, beautiful woman I had once loved. Instead, she became a shadow of herself, tired, lonely, and lost. Meanwhile, I moved forward with my life. The kids became my priority. Their laughter, school achievements, and our shared evenings became my new happiness. Every time I saw them smile, I knew it had all been worth it. The divorce process concluded, but Alice didn't give up. She started sending me numerous messages, attempting to gain even partial custody of the kids. Each letter was another manipulation attempt. Promises to change, apologies for her actions, even appeals to me as the man she claimed to still love. But I knew these were merely ploys to regain control and power. One day she called. I didn't pick up, but she left a voicemail. Her voice was trembling, almost desperate. She said she couldn't live without the kids, that every day without them was torture, and that she was willing to do anything to see them more often. I listened to the message and paused for a moment. Then, I remembered how easily she had betrayed our marriage, how she hadn't thought it necessary to be honest about her actions. I knew I couldn't let myself fall for her manipulations again. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting my children and my own peace of mind. I chose not to respond, but instead sent a message to her lawyer. I stated that I would not agree to any changes to the court's decision and that she had no right to interact with the children outside the established conditions. Her attempt felt like further evidence of her relentless need for control. In the meantime, I focused on what truly mattered, creating a new life for myself and the kids. They adapted well to the new house, new school, and new friends. They became more open and happier, and I felt I had succeeded in creating an environment free from lies and betrayal. Alice stopped trying to contact us after a few weeks. It didn't feel like a victory, but I sensed that I was finally shedding the weight she had left behind. My focus now was solely on the kids, and I refused to let the past disturb us. Life gradually returned to normal. The kids settled into their new school, I continued working, and I tried to make time for myself. After everything that had happened, I realized how important it was to have moments of peace, where nothing reminded me of the past. I was now just a father, not a husband, not a victim, but a man who had reclaimed his life. But Alice reappeared. This time, her methods were more subtle. Knowing I wouldn't see her, she reached out to my brother, Richard. They had known each other for years, and she tried to use him as an intermediary to get more time with the kids. First, he ignored her, but eventually he called me. "I know this isn't what you want to hear right now, James, but Alice is genuinely struggling. She really wants to see the kids," Richard said. He wasn't entirely on her side, but he wasn't fully supporting my decision to keep Alice away either. I stayed silent for a few seconds. This was her final move, her last attempt to reclaim everything she had lost. It was hard for me to hear about her struggles because I had already been through it all and realized that her remorse was just a way to regain her position. She wasn't grieving for the children. She was upset that she no longer had control over the situation. "Richard, I can't watch this anymore," I replied. "She chose her path, and I won't let her manipulate us again. I won't discuss this." Richard held his ground, but I was firm. Each of her actions reminded me more and more why I had decided to leave her in the first place. Meanwhile, my children were growing older, and our conversations were becoming more mature. We didn't talk about their mother often, but sometimes I noticed an unspoken question in their eyes. During those moments, I always tried to explain why I had made the decisions I had and why it was best for all of us. "Dad, why can't Mom be with us like before?" Sophie asked me one day. I sighed and hugged her. "Mom made some choices that can't be undone, and I believe it's better for you to live here with me now. We'll be happy." They were silent, but their eyes showed neither resentment nor sadness. They accepted it as it was. But for Alice, this wasn't the end. She opened a new front. Her weapon now was the public media. She gave an interview where she shared her version of the story, how I had allegedly taken the kids from her without cause, and how she was fighting for their love. I found out by chance when a friend sent me a link to the article. In it, she painted herself as the victim trying to win public sympathy. She wasn't just fighting to regain the children. She wanted to expose me as the villain who had taken everything from her, even her family. This was yet another challenge. She wasn't giving up, even when everything seemed lost to her. I understood that she wasn't only trying to reclaim what she'd lost, but also attempting to restore her reputation and elevate herself in the eyes of others. I responded to the article through my legal team, providing official documents that validated my actions and assured everyone that the children were safe. But even this didn't make her stop. She kept playing her game. Her actions didn't make me reconsider my stance. I stood firm. I wouldn't let her manipulate my life anymore. This wasn't a fight for us, it was a fight for her personal gains. I wouldn't allow it again. After Alice published her interview, telling her version of events, I realized I could no longer ignore her attempts to twist the narrative. It was time to act openly, not hiding behind lawyers or paperwork. This was my response, cold, resolute, and uncompromising. I turned to the media. My story needed to be heard. I took on the role of someone who had the right to defend his family, his reputation, and his children. I gave an interview where I honestly recounted Alice's betrayal, her manipulations, and the pain my children and I had endured. This video will be divided into two parts. In the first part, I'll take you through the events leading up to the betrayal and the decisions that followed. In the second part, I'll reveal how I fought for my dignity and my future, and what happened after I chose to take action. Stay tuned for both parts to get the full story.